So Bill Walton, when I first became the coach at Arizona, it was also like a transition period of time for him where he was now going to be the face of the Pac-10 and transition. Because remember, he was in the NBA for a long period of time, and he would do college games, but he was really moving towards being the voice of the Pac-10. And so it coincided with my arrival as a young coach who he never met before, and now I'm the new coach at Arizona. You also have to realize that his son, Luke, played for Lute Olson. And Bill Walton looked at Lute Olson as a version of John Wooden for obvious reasons. Both Hall of Famers, both national champions, an older veteran. And Luke Walton, Bill Walton, obviously loved Lute Olson and respected him a great deal. So here I come in, as the new guy from Cincinnati, Ohio. And at first, I didn't really know how to take him. And he probably looked at me as like, oh, who is this guy, right? So again, I just followed my own rules, tried to be myself. But there's a couple things about him. Number one, I would say this, that he's very much misunderstood by a lot of people. Not everybody, but those that know him the least will misunderstand him the most. And that is, you think that who he is on air is an act, and his joy and love for life and how he talks and how he approaches things on the air isn't who he truly is. And that's the furthest thing from the truth. He is that. I've never seen another side of him. And I mean that in a very complimentary way. Like, all of us try to be genuine, true to ourselves. Nobody's been more authentic to himself than Bill Walton. But his love for life, his caring attitude, his curious nature, his love for the game of basketball and like the West Coast, Grateful Dead, like that's who he was. And like you felt that whether it was a coach talking to him in a shoot around, if you met him on the street, if you watched him in a Pac-12 game, if you played with him, I'm sure, with the Boston Celtics, they all will give you a version of what I'm describing, right? And these stories that you hear coming out about him, they verify what I'm saying. But when I was no longer the coach at Arizona and I lost my job, I lived in Tucson for the remainder of my time there. So I was the head coach there for 12 years. I lived in Tucson for a 13th year. We didn't know where we were going. We lived there. My son was a freshman sophomore at Arizona. We had a lot of friends, so we just decided to stay there. But it was a weird dynamic. I'm no longer the coach, just sometimes just looking at that mountain saying, what am I supposed to do today? But I got a call in January, and it was a voice message. I still have it, and it was from Bill Walton. And I was like, Bill Walton. And I had talked to him a couple times after that period of time had ended for me. But he left this voice message. And if you know Bill Walton, he never leaves like a simple voice message. It's always long. And there's always a lot to it. And it'll start with Sean Bill Walton or Coach Bill Walton. And so he starts everything off like that. And he went through it and he simply said this: I'm in Tucson, I'm covering the U of A game. And generally speaking, when I'm covering the Arizona game, I think of you because you were the coach for a long time. We got to know each other. And now you're no longer the coach. And I just wanted to see if you're doing okay. I was thinking of you, miss you. Hope you're doing great. Just remember, you're an awesome guy. You're a really good coach. And I miss you, my friend, Bill Walton. And like he didn't have to do that 100 times over, right? I would have never thought anything differently. And yet, when you really think about who did what during that period of time, that's when you truly get to know people. And he didn't do that once with me. He did that like multiple times. Different versions. The first one was that, but he called again when I became the coach at Xavier. I got another voice message. And it's like at that point, him and we didn't work together anymore. I really couldn't help him in any way, shape, or form. But I think it goes to show the big heart and the thoughtfulness of him and really who he was. I also have one other Bill Walton story, and it goes like this. I was sitting at a Pac-12 dinner, and he happened to be the person seated next to me. It was a dinner that we all had to go to. As a matter of fact, if I remember it correctly, I think we got fined if you left early or didn't show up. I might have got fined one time. So you went to like Pac-12 Media Day and you had this dinner for no reason. But anyway, none of us could get out that night. You had to stay overnight and you had to just sit there for 3 hours and eat steak or whatever. Bill and I shared in why are we doing this? But anyway, we were there and we were sitting around a lot of different types of people. And one person in particular, he was just grilling Bill Walton, like one question after another, after another. And Bill Walton, as we talked about, kind, open-hearted, witty, and he would answer them all. But you could just sense that it was wearing on him because he was stuck. He couldn't get up. He was just in this dinner situation for 2 hours, 3 hours. And the more that he answered the questions, the more entertained I got because I could just feel it in him that he's just like, you're not going to ask me another question, are you? So then he or she across the table said, hey, Bill, I don't know if I've asked you this, but like Boston, what a great place. I've been a Celtic fan forever. And, I think she was going through I grew up there. I went to games. I went to a game when you and Larry Bird were playing, blah, 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 Boston. She set the tone. What did you love living in Boston or whatever? And he was like eating and he just kind of like stopped and he said, if the Pilgrims would have landed in San Diego, Boston would be a state park that nobody would know. That's it. He didn't give another word. He just went back down and finished eating, his salmon or whatever he was eating. And it took me actually 10 seconds to kind of transcribe in my mind, like, that's a wild answer.
That's so wild.
So where was he going? And if you really think about it, he was basically saying like, come on, man. I didn't want to live there. I played for the Celtics. I'm from San Diego. It's like the greatest place in the world, the greatest weather in the world. And I was stuck up there playing for the Celtics. That's how I felt about it. But it was such a classic, clever answer, and I just think he was just one of a kind. I got to know Luke Walton, and Luke was great to me as the coach, in terms of a former player and supporting everything that we did through thick and thin and being there in the good times and not so good times. He was awesome. And in his own right, great player, world champion, NBA coach. So, yeah, our thoughts as a family really have been going out to Bill and his family. But you talk about just an amazing, one-of-a-kind person. I feel great. There's a lot of gratitude for me that I had a chance to meet him and know him like that and be around him at that level, because when people are able to talk to me or bring up Bill Walton, I have a lot of context. You're not going to be able to just bring that topic up and me not know who he was. They talk about his teepee in his backyard. Our sports information director at Arizona, a younger guy, Matt Enzer. Matt became really good friends with Bill, actually stayed overnight in Bill's teepee, went to a Grateful Dead concert, I think multiple concerts with Bill. But that's just the type of guy that he was. He was amazing. And the other part that never really resonates with you is when he's talking to your team as an announcer and he walks out there and they know he's funny and all that, but none of them really truly understood, like, you do know he's one of the greatest players to ever play this game. The older generation will tell you, might be the greatest college player to ever play. You can go through championships, statistics to back that up. And a lot of people in the West Coast will say, like, Lou Alcindor, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and Bill Walton, like at UCLA, who is more revered. I mean, it's really a debate which says everything you need to know. So I would always try to pick a guy, especially our big guys, and say, do you know anything about him? And of course they can Google it and look it up, but at first they truly didn't know like who the guy was. DeAndre Ayton was with me, and he's trying to be the number one pick in the draft, and he's like this amazing 7-foot, person. He just looks like if you developed a basketball player in a lab, you're like, that's how he'll look like. And Bill Walton would walk out at shoot around, and they would be standing together for 5 or 10 minutes. and he would be talking to DeAndre, you know, and I would be watching and just trying to keep that image in my mind of who they both are. You know, one as a freshman in college and one who's the top 50 all-time greatest players in our game, you know, in his 50s or early 60s, you know, just kind of looking at it through that lens. But I would always tell DeAndre, like, look, just so you know, like, listen to what he says. I mean, he's very wise. He was an amazing passer, you know. And DeAndre said, really? You know, is that right?